Hi and welcome back to my channel. In this video I'm going to talk about the books I read in February, and this video was sort of split into two. It's the TikTok books and then you have the books that's going to be banned or have been banned. So it's a wild ride. And when talking about wild rides, I feel like the first author on this list today really fits that bill, and that is Michel Houellebecq and the Biggest Serotonin. So this author I feel like I know the best from the news. He has done a lot of crazy things and it seems like the things are getting weirder and weirder. So for the first time on this channel I do recommend you to check out Michel Houellebecq's personal life, because that's almost like reading a fictional novel itself. So naturally I wanted to read one of his books, and a friend recommended me to start with this one. He said that this was the easiest way to start, so I did. This novel is about a man and he is an agronomist. He is haunted by his past life, and one day he finds out that his wife has been selling her body to orgies in his apartment. And naturally he decides either to kill her or leave her. He goes for the latter one and also decides to go completely off grid. Then he travels to the south of France where he originates from, where he meets a lot of angry farmers. So the agro theme is also a big part of this novel. The connection between France and the EU and milk production. All this while popping pills and looking for his ex-girlfriend. I told you it was a wild ride. Some editors claim that you have to put a lot of yourself into a novel for it to be a good one, and I think this might be an example of this, because the language is a lot more vulgar than I'm used to, and I find that refreshing. Also, this should be a perfect fit for me. It has a crazy main character, the rest of the plot is kinda out there, and when dramatic things happen, it seems like the author is trying to suppress it, so it's not supposed to mean as much, which I find extremely funny and entertaining. But the one thing that's lacking is me caring for the main character. So he's in a lot of bad situation, and basically the whole book is about him being depressed, so there would be a lot of chances for me to hug him mentally. But this never happens, or that's not true. It happens a lot more towards the end, but it's late in the end. I'm not going to spoil anything, but something huge happens after a while, and that makes up for a lot of it, but it's not enough. Sometimes he also writes in a way that addresses us as readers in a condescending way. This doesn't make us feel any more compassion with the main character, but it's really funny. Even though I was disappointed, I blame that on my expectations. It was well written and it was wacky, and I will probably read one of Houellebecq's other books. Then over to a book that I did enjoy because of the main characters, and that is The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. So this is a part of the TikTok segment of this video. Our heroine in this story is called Hazel. She's 17 years old, and it seems like she's never been cancer free, or at least she has had cancer for a long time. She goes to this support group which she hates, but suddenly in this group she meets a boy called Augustus, and this changes everything. This novel is sugar sweet, and several times I rolled my eyes while reading it, but then remembered if you actually like what you're reading, you don't have to roll your eyes, but I don't think I can control it, because it's a bit too much. But as I said, I liked it. This is mostly because of the main characters. They are very, very lovable. They're kind of mature for their age. I don't know if you have a good English expression for this, but they don't act their age. They act like old people contained in 17-year-old bodies, which is very funny at times. From the beginning they are kind of opposites. She likes classic literature while he likes video games, but the thing that binds them together is their quirkiness and them being too old for their age. Also, one of the things that bind them together is their hunt for this author that has written their favorite novel. I should hate that, but I actually don't. Even though this novel surprised me a bit, I would say it's a book that gives you exactly what you expect, and you love it. I loved it. Of course, being the reader that I am, and being happy after I read The Fault in Our Stars, I decided to dial it down a bit, and I read this one. One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisvich by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. So this is one of the banned novels. As the title of this novel suggests, it's about Ivan Denisvich Zhukov. He was taken prisoner by the Germans during the Second World War, and of course, as a result of this, he was placed in Soviet labor camp for 10 years because of his betrayal, or because he was accused of having become a spy, as you do. But anyway, this novel is about his squad and himself in this camp and their survival. It is a fiction and it was published in 1962, but the author himself had 8 years in the Soviet labor camp after the Second World War, so you might say that he has some experience with the concept and things might be kinda accurate. I don't actually think that this novel was officially banned, but the author himself was kinda stateless for a while. So that's something. And when reading it, I found the most interesting thing to be how he doesn't sugarcoat anything. So when you think about how the Soviet Union might view this novel, that made the biggest impact on me. That being said, I found this to be kind of boring, and it's because it wasn't as dramatic as I imagined. After reading Herman Sachnowitz and the Norwegian novel The Anger Osodai about a Norwegian Jew in a concentration camp, that was a harsh experience compared to this. It's not as brutal. Not necessarily to say that you need brutality to make this novel work, but it didn't have that psychological aspect either. At least I didn't feel compassion with him to the extent that I should. Because you feel bad for him, of course you do, but it's not as riveting. This author won the Nobel Prize for Fiction, so the language has to have something people enjoy. Just not me. And for the historical significance, I found this to be interesting at least, but I did not enjoy it. And the roller coaster continues, so after reading that one, I decided on reading a children's novel, and that is The Jungle Book by Rudyard Kipling. So this is a story many of you probably know. I've of course watched the Disney version, but that's a long time ago and I couldn't really remember anything except boy in jungle with animals. And of course the story is about Mowgli, the young boy, being left in the jungle and then found by wolves. They decide to take care of him and then he's brought up to council to see if he can live with the animals. Some of them thinks he can, some of them thinks he shouldn't, and some want to kill him and he wants to kill others. You guessed it, it's the kind of children's novel that's the same amount of fun for children as grown-ups. I thought we'd just take a moment to enjoy the layout of this novel, because look at this. Isn't this gorgeous? Well, I think it is. Many of you have probably watched the Disney version, and I can't really remember, but this is way more brutal. And I can't imagine having watched this as a kid, but I do think I would have enjoyed it as a kid as well. And the thing that surprised me is, I've only talked about Mowgli, but I think it's actually 5 stories about different species of animals, and they're all kind of brutal, but I sort of zoned out after I finished reading about Mowgli, partially because I was kind of devastated. It was a bit overwhelming, but then all of the rest of the stories came and ruined it a bit. I don't know what it is about it. It's sort of like you can't read anything that's by the same author in a similar way but a completely different universe. It sort of freaks me out a bit or destroys my mood. At least I would have given the first story 5 out of 5 stars, and then the rest came and I was kind of bored. I don't know what else to say. It's just a beautiful story about animals wanting to protect him against other animals that wants to kill him. So the plot is simple but effective. I don't actually know if Rudyard Kipling was banned at any moment, but at least he's very controversial at this point. Then over to a TikTok book, and I say TikTok because it feels like an established saying. I also feel like the books on TikTok is a teeny bit not less diverse, but it's more of the same. I don't think that made sense at all. But when I choose to read TikTok books, I feel like I get some of the same experiences from them. And based on the books I've picked up from TikTok, that seems to be about right. If you have a recommendation for a TikTok novel, please comment below. Especially if you have a recommendation for a trending book on TikTok that's a bit different, because I think that's needed. Anyway, the next one is Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. So this is about a posh neighborhood, I would say, or at least a very established neighborhood in the US, where a family of 5 or 6 lives. That's not important. The important person in this family is the mother. She is called Elena Richardson, and one day a family of 2 with a mother and a child moves in and rents one of their apartments in the neighborhood. This changes the dynamic of everything. You might say that the first family is one where everything's planned and everyone goes to school and does great things and is a valued member of society, whereas the other mother is more of an artist. They're both brilliant, but a bit different. They're all great friends, but one day this major event happens and disrupts everything. And this makes the established mother dig into the past of the artist. And she finds a lot of things, surprisingly. I actually do like the title of this novel because it refers to all the conversations people have, all the gossip destroying people's lives. But also this novel starts with the big fire, and then we as readers are thrown back in time to where it all started. And I do actually like this method, creating a lot of buzz drama in the start to grab our attention. I'm an easily distracted person, so if this novel had begun without the fire, I think I would have been a lot more bored. Because it's not that fast paced. I would say it's kind of slow paced. Also a slow burner, so a slow burner and a slow starter. I actually think they needed that fire to get me into it. The characters are okay. I wish that some of them had more screen time, but that's life. A fun thing about this one is that it's set in the 90s. I grew up in the 90s and I don't think I've read any novels almost that's set in this period, so that's fun with all the references. But at times it felt more like it was set in the 60s, but I think that has to do with the gender roles and how they speak to each other and how the families behave like they're in the 60s. But this, I guess, is intentional. So a book that feels like it's set in the 60s, but it has a lot of 90s references. I would say it's very psychological. It deals with a lot of personal issues between the two mothers and things they have experienced and things that are very human. It's not a psychological thriller, it's more like a psychological mystery novel, I would say. I did enjoy aspects, but it's not my favorite. My next book is probably the one that I would have said if someone asked me what is the most popular TikTok book, and that is It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. So this one has been all over the place and has been standing in my shelf for nearly 2 years, and it was about time that I read it. This is about a woman with a troubled past. She meets this handsome, sexy, smart guy on a rooftop. They plan to never speak again, but fate will have it that they actually do. And things seems to be perfect. Maybe a bit too perfect. It certainly has a theme. I really didn't find a good way of talking about the rest of this novel without spoiling too much, so I'll just leave it at that. It's easily read, so if you want to read it, it'll go by quickly. Before I started this one, I thought this would be a regular romance novel, and to extent it is, but at some point it turns out to be more of a dramatic romance novel. Much more drama than romance, and it gets kinda dark, which I didn't predict. She has a troubled past, and to some extent this past is also a part of the present. When she was younger, she used to have a diary where she spoke to Ellen DeGeneres, sort of pretending like she was her friend and they spoke to each other, which I found to be kind of fun and weird. I don't know who I would have chosen to be my imaginary pen pal, but it wouldn't have been her. As with most romance novels, there is a lot of sex, and I find that to be kind of boring. Or at least they didn't do anything new with it. I don't know. I honestly don't know what it takes for me to enjoy sex scenes in books. So if you have recommendations, don't comment them below. I don't want them. I thought this one was okay. The thing I enjoyed the most is actually the message from the author, because she has something to say and it's mentioned a lot. It's an important part of this novel. I feel like if I talk about it, I'll spoil too much. But the success of this novel brings me joy because the theme is something many people need to know about, and I love that people loved it, even though I thought it was okay. Then we will go back to the controversial again, and this time with Constance by Amalie Skram. So Amalie Skram is one of our biggest classic authors here in this country, and this one has been on my list for a long time. I've enjoyed her shorter stories earlier when I went to school because she has this realism to the stories, making them quite believable and dark, which I enjoy. This is actually her first novel, and she paid for the print herself, but the publisher actually stopped the book after it was printed because they hadn't really read the book, and after they did, they said it was too realistic, so that only makes it more fun nowadays. It was first published in 1885, so some time has passed since this book first arrived. But it's about Constance, her name. She is a girl that has married a man 14 years older than her because of reasons. Reasons being that it's sensible, it's the classic tale in many ways. Obviously this hasn't made her happy and she misses home, so that's basically the story. I feel like the thing that differentiates this one from similar stories is how much focus it is on Constance herself. While the men are just idiots, they're idiots in the background, they do stupid stuff sometimes, then they come into the scene, but then they're out again and focuses on her, and I really like that. It made sense. The other thing is that it feels a lot more modern. When she describes their behavior, it feels like something someone would say today, or more similar to something someone would say today. Often when I read classics, it feels like every emotion is either understated or exaggerated. There's nothing in between, and with this one I felt like, yeah, that's a normal response. It's not like someone says something bad about your shoes and then you go out shooting him. I feel like some classics are in that direction. But does this realism make this book better? Not to me. It makes it ordinary, and that's not the best thing in the world. But it's an 1800s classic. It's not supposed to be my favorite books, I think. I'm going to read more Amalie Skram later. I'm pretty certain that other books might be better for me, but we'll see. I forgot to mention that one of the fun things about that novel is how much Oslo is portrayed and talked about, and some time has passed since last time I read about Oslo, and reading about Oslo in the 1800s is even more fun. Since banned books is a central part of this video, I couldn't have done it without Roald Dahl. So this is George's Marvelous Medicine, and this fits me nicely. It's very short, and I needed to get ahead of my reading goals for this year, so I've read some Roald Dahl books earlier, but now when they're rewriting his books to fit the now better, I felt it was time to read this one. And I must say now that I'm glad I have older versions, because I think they're more fun. But I don't know yet. This story is about George. He has this grandma that sits in her chair and yells at him, asking him to do stuff. He thinks she's horrible, and I guess he's right. One day she sits in her chair and asks him to give her medicine, and then he decides to make up his own medicine. And that's where the magic happens. And later, when he sees how the medicine works, his father decides to make it a business. And that, I must say, is the most fun thing about this one, how his father decides to do a business out of things that went horribly wrong with his mother-in-law. It's just a fun setup. It is absurd, and the style of writing reminded me a lot of David Williams, which I've talked about a lot on this channel. He's supposed to be the new one. I see very many similarities in the writing and the storytelling, so that was fun to compare. The last thing I thought I'd say about this one is how much I enjoy when authors actually keep their novels short. This is very short, but it couldn't have been longer. That would have been boring. And yeah, too many people write too much. So there you have it. And now for a book that doesn't really fit any category for today, and that is Helga Flatland with A Modern Family. We meet 3 siblings grown up on their way to Rome with the rest of their family, and on this vacation their parents tell them that they're getting a divorce, which is just the basis for the whole story. If someone would have asked me what is contemporary fiction, I would say this is contemporary fiction, because there's not a lot of more to say about the plot. Maybe other than that there are 3 siblings with 3 viewpoints, and they each have parts of this novel and talk to you about their struggles. I feel like it's well written, but I just find the topics that they're discussing to be very realistic and boring. It's things that you've discussed with people all of the time, like, you should have kids. Why do you not have kids? You have too many kids. Why do you complain about your kids? I have no plans of being in a relationship. What is wrong with you? All of those kinds of things, and I just find it to be a bit exhausting. Sometimes felt like reading Knausgård, only it's fictionalized. Also, one thing that annoyed me a bit is how the novel talks to you as a reader and makes sure that you're a bit ahead of them, that you understand more than they do before they do themselves, so it's easy predictable sometimes, and what's the point in that? I didn't understand. All this being said, I'm sure that there are plenty of people that find this to be very interesting. It has won a Norwegian award, and I actually ended up giving this 3 out of 5 stars, and I think the reason is the language. It's well written, as I said, and obviously, or apparently, that means something to me. You learn something new every day. And while we're on the subject, let's go for the next well-written novel, and that is The Road by Cormac McCarthy. Basically about a father and son walking on this road in this post-apocalyptic environment. I feel like that's everything they do, but they do it very well. And the first thing I noticed while reading this is how much atmosphere is pumped into my body after just a few pages. Everything in the first half of the novel is described in so many words, and sometimes that would annoy me a lot, but it really didn't. And the first thing that happened when I started reading this one is that I felt like I was thrown into this post-apocalyptic environment myself. It's so well written and so well described, all of the things around them, how they're feeling, or you can just guess how they're feeling based on the landscape they're in. It's one of those that makes you feel like you're a part of it. And that's always a good thing. The other thing you realize is how much these two care for each other, and it's not in the words they speak to each other, it's more in the unspoken and how much the father doesn't lose his mind. And that is heartbreaking and beautiful. But the thing I struggled with, and would have done with every similar story, is how much you don't know. So you've been thrown into this story and you don't know where they came from and you don't know where they're going, even though this is mentioned a lot. So that is frustrating if you're the kind of reader that likes to know stuff. If you're just there for the language, I think you'll enjoy this a whole lot. I ended up giving it 3 out of 5 stars, but I blamed that a bit on the time when I read it. I feel like if I read it another time, the characters would have gotten to me even more. So this is the one book I read this month that sort of have been showing up in my head after I finished it. So maybe there's more to it than I realized when I read it, and that happens sometimes. And I enjoyed the process after I've read books as well. So a good thing. I'll end this video with the most niche book on this list, and it's for those of you that wants to get in contact with the Norwegian spirit, and it's The Hiking Book from Hell by Are Kalve. So Are Kalve is a Norwegian comedian, and he doesn't like wandering around in the woods, as many Norwegian people do. And he starts this one with a quote saying that I've lost so many friends to nature, and he really describes how he has done so and what he thinks about it. And basically this novel is about him trying to get in touch with nature and being fond of the experience of being in nature. And one disclaimer, I do enjoy being outside in nature and I get a bit high when I'm out hiking in the mountains, but people that are outside hiking in the mountains also say a lot of stupid things, so I feel like he has a good foundation for writing this novel. And he describes this process so well. So he travels around in Norway to find the popular hiking destinations and to try them out. And he's unlucky with the weather. Things aren't really going his way. And it just underlines what he thought before he started this. He also realizes that the thing he's missing in nature are people, because he loves people and the cities. So I can't really relate to the things he says in this novel, but it's also the novel that I've laughed out loud the most from. It's very Norwegian, as I said, very niche. I don't know if it translates to other countries, but it is translated to English, to my surprise. So if you want to, you can check it out. Are Kalve is one of those comedians I truly enjoy. He's kind of down to earth and very descriptive. And he describes a lot in this book, and there is some repetition that might get a bit too much, but I enjoyed it either way. And my favorite moment in this novel is when he discovered that his own doctor was a person that went hiking and actually had done a lot of hiking in his life, and he felt like he could never behave the way he behaved before when meeting this doctor. It just says it in a funny way, and for me to sit here and translate a funny novel to you guys, it would be hopeless. I do recommend this one if you want to get in contact with the Norwegian spirit or get to know Norwegians better, at least 50% of us. I felt like it was very, very accurate and honest, in good and bad ways. So this sums up my February reads. I'm looking forward to next month because it's easier saying March than February. And if you have read some books that you'd like to recommend me and this community, please leave them below. I hope you have read some good books this month. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!